All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this little webinar. My name is Jakob Freund. I'm one of the two founders, also CEO of Camunda, and I'm happy to present a solution that we have created recently, which is about decision model and notation operated by Camunda in the cloud, provided as a service to you. Okay, so I would like to start right away. Just before doing that, just to let you know, there's a chat window on the left-hand side. So what you can do is you can enter your questions there whenever you have any questions, and I will take care of those at the end of the session. So the session is supposed to take about 60 minutes, and the last 5 or 10 minutes more or less are dedicated to your questions in case you have any. Okay, good. So I would say let's get started. So let me quickly share my desktop, and one, two, three, off we go. All right. Okay. So, just for those of you who are not yet familiar with Camunda in general, Camunda is a software that is open source, and it's all about BPM, which stands for Business Process Management. This means specifically that with Camunda you can model and execute 3 standards, all provided and maintained by the Object Management Group, OMG. Those standards are called BPMN. Let me quickly switch on my laser pointer. BPMN, which stands for Business Process Model and Notation, so it's all about processes and workflows. CMMN, the C here is for case, so it's about case management, less structured activities, so to say. And DMN, which is our focus today. The D here stands for decision, so the standard is called Decision Model and Notation. That software has been around for quite some years now. We have recently implemented DMN last year in November and released that, and it's being adopted quite rapidly. We have a number of customers using Camunda BPM. So here are some logos that are representative for the industries that are typically working with Camunda BPM. For example, the insurance industry, the finance industry, the logistics, like for instance the German National Rail, telco providers, as well as basically any company that relies on IT in order to implement their business model. Like for example, Zalando, which is I believe Europe's biggest online fashion retailer. So they are, for example, executing orders using Camunda BPM. Right. Besides that, there's of course a number of other customers, especially in North America, such as AT&T, FINRA, Sony, and others. So it is a software that is actually being used in very different situations whenever you want to automate business processes, basically, and also do software development, because Camunda BPM is all about combining developer friendliness with business IT alignment. Right. That's what we usually do. So in this webinar, I want to talk about DMN and DMN in the cloud. So why talking about DMN anyway? That's maybe a quite interesting question. So what we find interesting about DMN are basically those 5 points that we can see on the slide. First of all, DMN is about a new degree of transparency for decision logic. So as you will see in this webinar, you can use DMN to express decision logic in, for example, decision tables. Those decision tables will then be executed in an engine. So this is obviously an alternative to coding your decision logic in plain programming languages such as Java or C# or whatever. As a result, the decision logic will not longer be buried in your source code. So it is actually transparent. You can look at it and you know what's going on. Secondly, it's about communication, especially between business and IT. So the decision logic is not only transparent, you can look at it, but you can also actually understand it, even if you're not a developer. So this, of course, gives us a way better degree of communication, that it be doing software design as well as software operations. Flexibility is all about changes. So what this is about is that Let's imagine you have some application executing decision logic every day, and for whatever reason, you need to change that logic. So by externalizing that logic using DMN, you're actually able to change it without even touching your application, let alone redeploying it with all the hassle of typical heavyweight deployment procedures that might apply in your organization. So you're basically able to change decision logic without changing the application that consumes it, which of course makes you way more flexible. All that is available in very different use cases. That's something that people are not always aware of. So, for example, Camunda BPM combines certain standards, such as BPMN and DMN. Okay, so that's simple, of course. We have BPMN processes, and as part of those processes, we need to make decisions in order to, for example, route the flow, and therefore we call DMN decision tables from the BPMN process diagram. Okay, fair enough. But there's many different use cases where you can use DMN. So, for example, let's imagine some user interface that is about capturing user data that is entered into a form. So you could, for example, call DMN decision tables from within that user interface directly, completely without using a BPMN process engine or whatever, just for checking the user data, checking for whatever kind of inconsistencies, or displaying additional input fields based on the data that you have captured already, things like that. So that's just one example. But long story short, we have decision logic in very, very many different situations when implementing applications, and DMN can actually come in very handy in all of those situations. Yes, and then we have the matter of traceability. So this means that, and that's of course especially interesting again when we are talking about more, complex business critical decisions, we have traceability. So this means that whenever you execute a decision table and you have configured the Camunda DMN engine accordingly, those executions will be logged. So they were logged into some persistence technology, such as a database, for example, and you have a history, and you can expect that history later on, which will provide, of course, helpful information about the decisions that have been made, why they have been made in a certain way, all the way to business activity monitoring related aspects like usage statistics and things like that. So all those aspects are very interesting when it comes to DMN and decision automation. You see, of course, certain similarities with BPMN. So basically, we have very similar advantages with BPMN when it comes to processes, and thanks to DMN, they are now also available for decisions, which is cool. Okay, so that's about DMN. So why now DMN in the cloud? And I think it's quite obvious. So Camunda BPM is basically available as an on-premise technology. You can download it. It's open source after all. You can just get it and install it and operate it yourself. However, when you can just consume a decision engine that is available in the cloud as a service, you don't need to take care of all those things yourself. So that's why we have set up Camunda and focused it on DMN in this first increment on Amazon Web Services. Actually, put a nice API around it and some user interface tools and made it available. So I will quickly explain the basic mechanics, how it works, and then we will dive right into how to actually use it. So just to make you aware of that, I don't claim to be a real developer myself, but I certainly love programming. So this is, of course, a bit geeky, this session. The idea is that any developer can benefit from DMN without necessarily operating Camunda BPM themselves. So that's why you will certainly see source code. It will be in a terrible fashion because I'm such a bad programmer, but hopefully if you also like coding, you will be able to follow what I'm doing. Okay, so basically, how does it work? We have some application written in whatever language. That application wants to make a decision. So, for example, based on the current weather conditions, we want to recommend to our end user a appropriate activity on that day. So what we have here now is we have some very simple decision table, and I also want to take this opportunity of this webinar to give you kind of a crash course about the DMN syntax. So in here we have a very, very simple decision table, only consisting of an input column and an output column. Obviously it's about the current weather condition. So here we have the label. In this gray cell we have the variable name that the decision engine will actually look up. That variable is of a certain type. In this case it's string, obviously, and now we will compare the value of that variable to certain potential values. So this could be it's either sunny or rainy today. And if it is sunny, there will be an output variable called idea, which is about a recommendation, what I can do today. So if it's sunny, I should go running. And yes, on the contrary, if it's raining, it's recommending watching TV, which is not my personal recommendation, but that's the example. Right, very simple. The little U here in the upper left corner indicates that the hit policy, the so-called hit policy of this DMN table is unique, which means that, yes, the slide deck will be shared, which means that only one rule can apply in one execution. Okay, so if you would have overlapping rules, if you had overlapping rules, then there would be an exception. So this is kind of a consistency check. There's other hit policies available in the standard, and also in Camunda, of course, that we will look at later on in this webinar. Okay, so very simple as an application. I call this REST API, and available at https://dmn.camunda.cloud/API/version run. Then we have that specific method, which is called decision, and if it's called via a post request, it means that we want to evaluate a decision that has been deployed under a certain key. So we provide that key, provide those input information in JSON, and we will get JSON back, which is about the result. As simple as that. Okay, so that's the principle. Now let's look at how it actually works and how it feels like to use it. I will therefore complete this little presentation and jump to my browser. So pointing at dmn.camunda.cloud, there is a little user interface, and it's a very plain layout by purpose. Since we're running in beta right now, we didn't want to spend too much time on design and fancy things like that. So it's very simple. What we can see here is a table editor that is already embedded in the website. So technically, this leverages DMN.js, one of the libraries that we have created for using those standards. So it's a JavaScript library. You can embed it yourself in your own website if you like, and it allows us to display standardized DMN XML files as well as edit them. So in this very simple example, yet again, it's about recommendation, this time about a dish that we could serve if we expect guests tonight. So we have two input columns. One is about the current season, one is about the number of guests that we are currently expecting. So for example, if it is fall and we expect up to 8 guests, then the recommendation is to serve spare ribs. And if it's winter, up to 8 guests, it's about roast beef, and so on and so forth. So here we can already see a little bit about how DMN works. And the syntax that you see here, like for example those little symbols and the interval with the brackets and stuff. This is not defined by Camunda. This is not a proprietary syntax. This is actually standardized. It's part of the DMN standard. It's called FEEL. FEEL stands for friendly enough expression language. So it's supposed to be as powerful as possible, but as painless as possible at the same time, in order to be easy to use. So our rule of thumb is you don't need to be a developer to use FEEL, but you should have a certain you should like to use, for example, Microsoft Excel and define formulas in there. And if you're comfortable with that kind of tooling, then you're also comfortable with FEEL. That's our assumption, or what we have seen so far. What we can also see is that comparing strings means putting those values into quotation marks. What we can also see is that in rule number 5, we can say, okay, if it's either for a fall or winter or spring, so it could be any of those values. Okay. And in rule number 6, we can see that if it's summer, doesn't matter how many guests we expect, we will always serve light salad and a nice steak. So what we can do now on the website is we can just try out this table. So when I say test, I can just enter some example input data, like for example, let's say it's fall and we're expecting 5 guests, and we will simulate the result. It's telling us that, okay, in that case, this rule here would apply, so it's highlighted, and it's also showing us the JSON that we could expect as a result coming from the API if we should actually execute that table using the REST API from within our own application. Okay, so this already allows us to play a bit with a table that we are creating. So for example, if it's summer, doesn't matter how many guests we expect, okay, it's about a light salad and a nice steak. So let's do some changes now. Let's say we want to add another rule, and we say, okay, what if it's summer, and let's say up to 8 guests are about the light salad, but anything that goes beyond that is, you probably recognized my German accent already, so let's serve potatoes. Okay, so let's try this out. We test it again. So let's say it's summer, and we expect 10 guests. So now it's obviously about potatoes. So we have just changed this table. So yeah, long story short, you can play with this. You can try it out. You can actually download this table. So if you hit this little button here, the download button, it will save the table on your hard disk. It will save it as a standardized DMN XML file. Okay, so this is again not a Camunda specific format. It's the format that has been defined by OMG. So if you have an OMG compliant a modeler that supports DMN, it should be able to actually consume that file. If you need one, there's one available. It's coming from Camunda. So I can just click on this file here, and there will be the Camunda modeler on my other screen. Let me quickly drag it over. So here we can see a little desktop application that allows us to create DMN tables. It's actually a nice little modeler that is not only good for DMN, it's also good for BPMN. So when I click on new BPMN file, you can see that there's a nice BPMN modeler here. Actually, this is our default tool that our customers use when creating executable BPMN diagrams. So therefore, there's also technical properties available, everything we need in order to create models that are executable, let it be BPMN or DMN. This modeler is available for free. So just to let you know, when you point your browser to camunda.org. Yep. And you hit the download button and then switch to this little tab here, the modeler tab. Then you can, download the modeler for the operating system that's yours. And as you have already, so it's just free to use, as you have already recognized, it's very similar to what you have seen on the website. And that's no coincidence because it's technically embedding the very same JavaScript library that we also embedded in the website. So that's how it works. Okay, so maybe just let's change this now in this modeler. Let's say it's about Kraut, making even more fun of Germans. So now I have changed this this table here using my desktop modeler, and what I can do now is I can just upload that into my website again. So let me quickly open my download folder. I think that's where I've saved that file in the first place. And I can either hit this button there, or I can just drag and drop. And now we can see, okay, now it's all about Kraut, obviously. Let's make sure that it's still working. So I will test it once again. I mean, I did change a lot, but still, to be sure. Okay, so it's still working. So now I would actually like to deploy this table. I've only been, playing with it. I've only simulated it. Technically, by the way, already using the DMN engine that runs in the background, but without actually deploying the table. So, but I can now be sure that the engine can consume it. So what I do now is I deploy it. And what happens now is that I receive keys. And the idea behind it is inspired by things like, for example, Doodle, that little tool that allows you to schedule meetings without the need to, actually create a user, sign up anywhere, and get a login. So we wanted to avoid that as well for this first increment to make it as simple as possible. So we have now received 2 keys. The first key is what we call a public key. And it's called public because this is the key that you are going to use when you actually call this decision table from your application. So that's how you identify it, when you call the REST API. So this means that you will embed this key in your source code. And this means that maybe other people will be able to see that key. So for example, when it's part of your website, because it's embedded in some JavaScript logic, then of course people can just inspect the JavaScript and see that key. So in those situations, you don't want them to be able to edit or change the decision table that has been deployed. That's why we have called this a public key, and it's only good for executing and viewing the table. The private ID, however, is something that you can use in order to edit and change the table once it has been deployed. The idea of flexibility to make changes in your decision logic without touching your application. So I will now just simply copy those 2 keys to my clipboard. So what I will do is I will copy this one here, and I will just put it in a notepad. So let's say this is my public thing, and I will also store my private key there, private ID as we call it here. All right. And now, in a second step, I will quickly save this and check if the table is really deployed and available. So I will switch to the View tab here, and I will simply copy and paste the public key again. Okay. There we go. So it's obviously there. Nice. Actually, in this view, we can also see if this table has been executed already, which obviously has not been yet the case. So what we can do now is we can now actually call this table from our own application that I'm going to set up. And just to fill you in quickly how this works, and just by the way, you can always check out this little getting started tutorial that explains everything that I'm currently doing, including a link to a DMN reference guide that explains the complete syntax behind feel and how you can use it, etc. So that's where you can find everything that you need to know in order to actually use DMN. So just to let you know, I will call that REST API, and that REST API is also documented here, and it's a very, as you can see, plain and simple REST API. So what I'm going to call now is I will call a method that is called /decision/key, and that method will then expect certain JSON that we have seen in one of my slides already, and it will return certain JSON so that I can consume it. We have provided a good number of examples in different languages that show you right away how you can consume that service from those programming languages. It's always just like more or less half or a full dozen lines of code. What I'm going to use is jQuery, for the simple reason that since I'm such a terrible programmer, it's more or less my favorite language because it allows me to use JavaScript without being really good at JavaScript. So that's why I like jQuery, especially when talking to REST APIs. So I've created a very simple web page. You can see it here already. I call it the dish recommender. It's running on my local drive, so there's no server. It's really just an HTML page that I have plainly opened in my browser. And I can only, ask for, or I can tell the current season and the number of guests I'm expecting, and then I want to get a recommendation. So now let's look at the source code of that website. So not too much really, as you can see. I'm using jQuery as I mentioned already. Here's the HTML, which allows me to pick the current season. Here is an input field that allows me to enter the number of guests that I'm expecting. Here's the button that I can click and here's some area that is reserved for displaying the result later on. The rest is JavaScript, and as we can see here, this is jQuery now. When I click that button, there will be a variable called data. And that variable will be JSON, and that JSON looks like this. We provide a season of type string variable with a value that we get out of that HTML element up there, with the ID season. So the currently picked option will then be the value of that variable. And we will have the guests of type integer, which comes out of that input element called guests. We will do number comparisons, so therefore, of course, we need to provide proper types, which is why we parse this as a number in JavaScript before actually handing it over, which basically means that the JSON value will come, without quotation marks. Okay, then we will do an AJAX call, which is of type post. So we send a post request to the REST API, this one here, the very same endpoint that you can use as well. It's obviously encrypted, and then we will call the method decision, and now we hand over the public key, and this is not the public key that I've just saved, so I need to replace this with a public key that I've just saved, which is about my kind of stupid crowd example. And okay, public key. So let's go over there. Oops. There we go. Okay, so it's of type JSON. We expect JSON, and we will log the result in the browser console, just for the purpose of looking at it if something goes not as we thought it would go. And then we will just provide a simple printout saying, okay, you should serve this here. And this tells us again about the JSON structure. So as you can see here, the variable data will have an element called outputs, and there will be, that's what we expect now, an element called dish, which is the name of the output variable in our decision table. And then we look at the first value. So it's obviously an array. And I will explain in my next example why this is actually an array. But first, let's try it out. So I need to save this. Oops, yeah. Okay. And let's refresh this page. I did it myself now. So let's see if it works. There we go. Let's serve count. Okay. And yeah, just the count example. So if it's only 3 guests, it's about light salad. And my actually personal favorite is the dry aged garlic steak. Okay. So obviously working. We can quickly look at the console. What has been logged? We received an object with outputs. There's just one element called dish, which has an array, which is just one element of this value. There we go. Okay. Now let's push this a bit further. So let's change the decision table now. Okay. First of all, we can of course just change it in some very simple way. So there we go. We go to the edit table area now. We need to type in the private ID. So let's get the private ID that I've saved away. Okay. Good, there we go. So now I don't want to make too many changes right now. Let's just say, okay, let's say again, it's summer, and oh no, let's make it even easier. It's not so important right now. So need to save time. Let's say this is about potatoes again, okay? So not many changes, just making sure how it's gonna behave when it's 10 guests in summer, potatoes. Okay, that makes sense. So we will deploy it. What we have done now is we have actually deployed it as a new version, and the public key will always point to the head version of the table. So the public key stays the same. We don't need to touch our application, obviously, but the private ID has changed since this is a new version now. Okay, I will copy this to the clipboard. Okay, I will save it away for later use. Okay, there we go. And now I will try it out. So not touching my application, not even refreshing the website or anything. I'm curious what I should serve if I'm expecting, let's say, 12 guests in summer. It's about potatoes. All right. Good. So that's the first example. Now let's actually change the table a bit more so that it becomes more interesting. And also I want to show off a bit what you can do with DMN. So let's assume that we have a situation where we actually want to serve in summer the salad with a steak together with potatoes, okay, as a side dish. So what I can do now is I can just say, okay, no matter how many guests we have, you know, if it's summer, those two rules should apply. That's what I've just expressed in DMN now. If the cell is empty, it means that the value doesn't matter, this will apply. Since we have an AND logic between the two input columns, it means that, you know, yeah, you get it. All right, so I will quickly test this, and there will be, I can always say that, an exception. Why? Because let's say it's summer and, I don't know, 11 guests now. So, oh, there was an error. What happened? The hit policy is still set to unique. And as you can see in the documentation, if it's unique, only one rule must apply in one execution. Anything else would be a breach of consistency check, and therefore there would be an exception. So we changed this now to another hit policy. There's many. I don't need to explain all of them right now, but one that is quite common, for example, is first. So the very first rule that applies will actually determine the outcome. So when I do that, what will happen now is, let's say it's summer, and now it's only about the lights and the nice steak. That's not exactly what we intended. We want to have both. So what I'm going to do now is I will change this from first to collect. And collect is a pretty powerful thing. It means that many rules can apply, and then the decision engine will have a certain behavior based on the operator that you pick. And again, this is all not Camunda specific. This is standardized by the object management group. So what we can see here is, for example, something called sum. This means if my output value was a number value, the numbers would be added up. So there would be a calculation and you would get back the sum. Which means, like, if it's summer and there's let's say a 5 here, and in rule number 7 there would be a 6, then we would get back an 11, for example. Or min and max, you can guess what this is about, and count, which means like how many rules have applied. Right, we're interested now in list. This will just plainly return a list of results. So let's do it. Let's try it out. It's summer again. No matter how many guests, both rules have applied, and we can see in the JSON already that now the array makes sense, because now we can see that there's two input entries, like the salad and the potatoes. Okay, so let's deploy this. Save again the private ID of the specific version. Okay, and let's check how this looks in our application. So it's still summer, still 12 guests, light salad and a nice steak. Why? Because the JSON has now returned, as we can see here, or contains now an array with two elements, but we are only looking at the first element. So now my limited jQuery skills are needed again. So what I'm going to do now is quickly change this. All right, so let's say we have a var called dish list, and this should just be, the beginning of an enumeration. And now we say, okay, for each data outputs dish, it's called values. Right, we will call a function which looks like this. Okay, and in that function we will say that dish list variable should get an enumeration bullet point plus the value, and that's how it works, doesn't it? Okay, and now we should close that enumeration. So the dish list will get this closing tag. Okay, good. Let me quickly check if we're good. We will see that in a second. I mean, it looks good. So let's try it out. Now I need, of course, to refresh my little website here, and let's say it's summer and how many guests, whatever. Yeah, and no, not yet. Of course, because I've forgotten to, I need to replace this here, of course, this little fellow. Now we need to print out that variable that I've just populated. Okay, the dish list. Let's try it again. There it's summer, how many guests, whatever, and there we go. Okay, now we are obviously getting back and consuming and using in our application, the output values that we received from the table. Okay, nice. Let's do a little bit more now. So what I would like to do next is I would like to introduce a second output column, because that's also possible in DMN, which is actually quite powerful. So what I can say now is, okay, let's say that it's not only about food, it's also about beverages. So what I can say now is, okay, there's drinks that I'm going to serve, and so we call this beverage variable, and let's say I'm not very brilliant here, so let's say it's mostly about beer, and in some cases maybe red wine, and beer, and let's say be fancy, it's a pale ale, and the potatoes. Yeah, we will actually serve additional water with the potatoes since they kind of dry. Okay, so now we have a second output column. This means that, if certain rules apply, there's more than just one output that could actually come out of this. And there's many use cases for that. So just to give you one example, we've currently consulted with a tax authority, and we recently did that, and we figured out that when people enter certain data in forms or send over certain information, there could be checks if those information are actually valid. And if those information are not valid, there should be return messages, and those messages should, for example, consist of an error code, which is one column, and an error message, which is dedicated separate column. Just one example. Okay. Right, so let's try this out. First we test it. So it's summer and whatever guests. Okay. And we can see now, okay, we get back two outputs now, a dish and a beverage. Dish is actually two dishes, and the beverage is about the pale ale and the water. So what I'm going to do now is I will quickly save this table locally just to be sure and deploy it. Okay, there we go. The key is still the same. The ID has once again changed, so I will save it once again. All right, and I would like to try this out. So when I don't change anything in here, what's going to happen? Not much, since I'm not looking at the beverage already in my code, but I can quickly change that. This is really just copy and paste now. So let's say we have the dish list, and let's say we have, let's call it the beverage or bev list. Beverage. Okay. Okay. You should serve, and with. Now it's about the drink. The bev list. Okay, so I would say let's try it out. So back to the website, refreshing it, playing it summer, and there we go. So now we're serving a certain dish with certain drinks. Okay, so we have seen once again what DMN actually allows us, and we've also seen how we can consume that from within our application in a quite simple, straightforward way. Now let's do something else. I think this is already the last example to give you an idea about the possibilities. So let's say we want to also determine the amount of beverages that we are going to serve. So let's say, for example, let's talk about units first, okay? So let's say I want to call it Bev unit. If we're talking beer, it's always about cans. Okay, and okay, for that one maybe not. Let's say that would be a bottle. And beer, and even pale ale is served in beer. And then we have bottles for water. Okay, why is this important? Because now I'm going to talk about amount of those units. So let's say, okay, if we expecting a number of guests in fall and we're going to serve beer, we're going to serve as many cans of beer as there are guests. Okay, so of course I could set this to integer and just say, I don't know, I'm going to serve 10 cans of beer. But what if I'm only, expecting 1 or 2 guests? Could be a nice evening, but still not really dynamic, So what I could do then is I can say, okay, please look at an input variable and let that determine this output variable. So I can here just say, without quotation mark, guests. And this now will refer to that input variable. Okay, so it will take the amount of guests and it will say, okay, that's the amount of cans of beer that we are going to serve. And let's say for red wine, we are actually generous. And same, of course, for the other examples. And now for the water, let's do something different here. And also for the pale ale in summer. Let's say in summer, it's hot, people are thirsty, so we need more ale. What we can also do is operations here. So just one example is we could say, okay, please serve 3 times the number let's serve 3 times the number of cans. How do you say that in English? What I mean is, multiply the number of guests by 3, and then you have the number of cans of ale that you're going to serve. Okay, and also we can say, but only serve half the amount of bottles of water. So this means, like, if we have, 12 guests, we are only expecting 6 bottles of water on the table. If I do this, for obvious reasons, I need to change the data type here from integer to, for example, double, since this could, of course, be a number that is behind the dot. Okay, right. So let's try this out. First, we test it. Let's say summer. We are expecting, let's say 6 guests, okay? And now, what we get back is, we're going to serve our food. We're going to serve cans and bottles of pale ale and water. And we're going to serve 18, obviously, cans of pale ale and 3 bottles of water, okay? Now it's of course interesting. We want to consume this in our application, and now it becomes apparent why beside this outputs section, there's also a rules section, because the problem that we have now is of course that we have those arrays, but we don't really have a strict correlation between those array entries. I mean, we don't really know that the 18, refers to the pale ale and the cans. Of course, in a way, it does it implicitly because of the array index, but I mean, that's not really the way to go if you want to build some, safe application. So what we can do now is we can look at the rules. So as you can see here, we will get a dedicated entry for each rule that has applied with the outputs that came out because that rule applied. So we can see, for example, okay, we have one rule which was about summer, and that rule applied, and the result was we're going to serve salad nice steak, and because of that also cans of pale ale, to be specific 18 cans, and the same about the water. Okay, so now we can actually look at those rules, and we have the secure correlation of those output values. So let's quickly do that. And then we're through with this little hacking example. So I'm going to save it locally once again. I'm going to deploy it once again. I will store away the private ID once again. Public key remains the same as always. Okay. And now I will look at my little application. So, of course, we don't yet see the new stuff here. We can only inspect the console, and we can see that there's, new stuff that comes out of the REST API. So let's consume that now in the source code. And that's actually pretty straightforward in jQuery. So what I'm going to do now is I will now not iterate over the outputs anymore, but actually over the rules. So I can say, let's put together a variable called serveList. We will look at rules. We will only look at rules. We will iterate over those rules that came out, that have applied during execution. We will put together that variable here, serveList, and we will say, okay, this is now about. Now we look into the details. This is about the dish, so the food. Let's do it like this. What else is it about? We're going to serve that together with something to drink. So it is about a certain amount, of like this, of a certain unit. A certain unit of a certain drink. Beverage value. Okay. Looks good enough. So let's see if it works. We don't need this fellow anymore. Okay. And now we say you should serve list. Okay. So iterating over the rules that came out of the REST API, putting together our recommendation based on what's in there. That should be it. So let's try it out. Summer, 6 guests in this example. Looks good. So we have the light salad and a nice steak. That's going to be served with 18 cans of pale ale. And we have potatoes. That's going to be served with 3 bottles of water. Okay, so yeah, that's basically how you do it. Just a few more things that I wanted to point out, and then I will have time to answer your questions. So let's do one thing. Let's look at what has happened so far. So what I can do now is I can go to the View tab, and let's type put in that public key again. Okay, this one here. Oops. This. Okay, there we go. And just to let you know, you can do it like this. If you want to share this as a deep link, that's also possible. You can actually, type in the key up there as part of this URL, like that. And you can just send that link to someone else, and that person can click on the link, and the table will show up right away. What we can see here is now we have the table. We can download it. We can play with it also. But we can also look at the executions for this specific version of the table that have happened already. And you can see that obviously there were 2 executions so far, which makes sense. Those were my 2 tests that I had so far. So what I can do now is I can inspect those. So let's just create a third one. Let's say, okay, I'm expecting, not sure, let's say, I don't know, 8 guests, okay? So obviously different values now. So what I can do now is I can quickly refresh this. So we have the third execution that has just happened. We can inspect it, so we can see the rules that have applied in that specific execution. We can inspect the input data that came in. We can see them up there in the table. But we can also see them, in the JSON here. And and that's how we can actually, look at what has happened. There's also a nice little feature here, which is about, statistics. So when I click on this button, we will see a heat map that displays which rules have applied most often so far. And I mean, all my tests were about summer, so we're always about those rules. But let's change that. So let's say, what happens if it's winter, really? Same amount of guests. Just the roast beef with 8 bottles of red wine. That's probably my favorite rule now. So what we can do now is we can look at this, so we can see that that rule has applied once so far, and when we play a bit more with that, we can actually change this. So now we have voted for winter quite often. So obviously the balance has changed now. So that gives of course a nice little overview about how our table is being used. All right, good. So that's about it for now. Just to point out the potential next steps for you now. I mean, as I said already, this is currently in beta mode. So this means when you're looking at the terms of use, it's available without any costs. However, we don't give any guarantees for availability, correctness, data protection. That's of course quite important. So why did we set it up in the first place? Because it was quite easy to do that technically, because we already have some experiences around operating Camunda in cloud environments. So this here is technically running on Amazon Web Services. It's set up in a pretty stable and reasonable way. So it is actually reliable. However, we don't guarantee it. We do that because we want to see if and how such a service would be adopted and received by the community. So we're interested if this is actually something that you find valuable. We're interested in understanding how you use it or how you would like to use it. We love to learn, of course, or we are flattered when you say that you specifically like certain features. But even more importantly, we're interested in what's missing. So this is why when you look here, there's a little link here. Participate in the survey. So when you click on that link, there's a very, very little questionnaire popping up with about 5 questions only, very quickly to complete. And this questionnaire allows you to provide us with your feedback in a structured as well as unstructured way. That will help us immensely in order to develop this even further and turn this eventually into a service that also, of course, comes with appropriate guarantees. We don't yet officially say even if, but especially when that's going to happen, because we right now want to stay flexible and especially learn from your requirements. So the best next steps for you now are try this out, play with it, provide us your feedback, just shooting us an email, calling us, or completing that questionnaire. There's, as I said, some examples here that should help you get going. Some of them are, ready to go right away. So, for example, there's another example implemented in jQuery, which is about what you could do in Berlin if you should ever visit this beautiful city. So let's say it's spring and it's sunny, and let's say it's a morning activity, so we could do a bicycle trip in Grunewald, stuff like that. When you look at the underlying decision table, you can see that it's actually a bit more complex. So there's a bit more about feel that you can see here, for instance, how say that conditions that are about certain things that should actually not apply, things like that. You can also see that people are already playing with it, so that's quite nice. And there's that heat map once again, and just like the default rules, that's why it pops up so often. So that's one example that you can play with. There's one which is about traveling to the US, which I personally do quite often. So that's why I was interested in, under which circumstances I could actually travel there without a visa and things like that. And a third one, which is about job scoring if you're comparing job offers that you've received. This one is actually implemented in PHP, just for a change, so you can find the source code there, showing off how it's working in PHP. And this is actually about that collection rule that adds up numbers. So if, when you see here, the job offer is about super interesting tasks, but the salary is, let's say, pretty low. Coworkers are okay, but not great, and it's doing well, but not awesome. Then we have a score of 20, for example. Okay, so when we look at that table, we will see that For certain rules, there are certain numbers here that apply. Those can be also, subtractions that would then impact the scoring. So just one more example for what you can do with DMN. Also, there's that little cheat mode here. So if the company that provides you the job offer is actually Camunda, then there's a certain different outcome, which is just being silly again. All right. There's other examples in different languages, as I said, available on GitHub. So C#, for example, actually provided by my co-founder Bernd. So there you can see how it works from there if you want to consume that REST API, and so on and so forth. All right. I had to hurry a bit at the end. Time's up. I will quickly look at the questions that came in. I hope that that was interesting so far. So let me stop the screen sharing now. Oh no, I can actually look at it in this chat window, I believe. Or maybe let me quickly. Oh no, it's not that easy. Okay, I will do it like that. All right. So if you have any questions, just type them in right now. I have a few more minutes. There are some questions in the backlog that I'm going to answer now. So, okay, one question is from the US actually. Can you implement this public key feature using the standard DMN engine in the Camunda server itself? Will you be adding the interactive test features to either the modeler or the Camunda UI interface? Okay, that's of course a very reasonable question. So there's someone who's obviously using our standard on-premise product already, and the features that I have demonstrated are not yet part of that product. So therefore, of course, they would need to be, added manually. However, I mean, this is all implemented against our standard product. So therefore, it's a very, and it's actually not a lot of code that we've implemented. So to be honest, this was like one week effort here that allowed us to provide something that is already quite powerful and clean. So, long story short, it is not part of the official and officially supported product yet. However, if you would like to, have those features, just contact us, please, and we can certainly find a way to make them available. I won't promise that, to anyone, but I know the gentleman who asked this question, and it's certainly possible in this case. Besides that, in terms of core product features, of course, makes a lot of sense to make, especially the test feature available to provide a better user experience and trying out DMN tables right away. I'm not really expecting it to become part of the Camunda modeler that is currently available, because that's a desktop application that is very lightweight, not running any Java server, and the decision engine is still written in Java at the end of the day. So then of course that's kind of cumbersome. However, as we I think mentioned in the past already, we have on our agenda the matter of a web-based modeler for this year. I mean, it's already there basically. In the sense of, that the stuff just runs in the browser. So when you try it out, let it be the DMN or the BPMN stuff, you can just point your browser to bpmn.io, and there obviously there you can just try it out. I think it's also available for DMN. I'm not even sure how it works, but don't know if this demo maybe like this. I'm not sure. I can figure that out, but one way or the other, it's technically possible, and there will be some web modeler with a backend repository coming up, and then we will most certainly also provide features like the testing feature. I cannot give any timeline right now, but it's like our ambition is to provide something this year, but that's all I can say for now. What else do we have? Flattering compliment. Thanks for that. Are there plans to expand the DMN engine to support multi-table decision? Oh yeah, that's a good one. So, how about multi-table decision models? What happens if I have more than one decision table that I need to evaluate? I have it in this one example actually. In this example, which is about the US visa waiver program, we actually have two decision tables. One is only about if a certain country participates in that program that allows you to enter the US using the ESTA. There I can just say, okay, if I'm from, what do we have here, like Georgia can of course be misleading, but let's say Gambia, for example, I will need a visa. Okay, when I'm from, for example, Germany, then I don't necessarily need a visa, so I might be able to travel on ESTA, and this is a different decision table. So there it's about certain conditions, such as how long I'm going to stay in the US. If it's more than 90 days, then an ESTA is not sufficient. I will need a visa. So here I have obviously connected those two tables on the client side using jQuery. However, how about connecting those tables like in a server-side fashion? Different options that are available. You can actually refer one decision table from the other table using expressions. I did not show that here. I also want to be upfront about that. We have not done so much about that in terms of the cloud offering. So by purpose, we have switched off the possibility to execute, for instance, JavaScript code within the decision table in the cloud offering for the simple reason of making it as secure as possible. Technically, it's no problem, to execute code within the table in the Camunda DMN engine, but it's not yet available in the cloud. So that's one option. Second option is, that's actually kind of the best practice, to work with decision flows. So to actually leverage BPMN and call different decision tables from within the BPMN flow, which allows you to set up, certain decision funnels. There's, of course, a third option that is not yet available with Camunda, which is part of the DMN standard. It's called DRD, Decision Requirements Diagrams. We have not yet implemented those, partly for the reason that, we're already applying DMN in many different consulting engagements, so we already have some best practice experiences. And so far, it always turned out that the BPMN approach for the decision flows was actually better suited for what our customers wanted to do than the decision requirements diagrams. So that's why I'm not even sure that we are going to implement them soon. We may do that eventually, depending on how many people really need them and want them, but they're not yet there, certainly. All right. I think that that should be it for now. I'm sorry about that. I wanted to show that example, and actually I forgot that I have stopped sharing my desktop. That's why you asked those questions. Okay, very quickly. That's what I have just demonstrated. The visa thing. So when I'm from Germany, I may travel on ESTA, but if I stay in the US more than 90 days, then the ESTA won't be sufficient. So that's what I was just demonstrating, that we connected two decision tables here, basically using the client logic with jQuery. So yeah, you can see it here. And you can find that example as well on the website. Okay, good. Sorry about that. Okay, so one last question that I've seen. Okay, can you use wildcard or contains for input strings? Yes, you can do that. It's possible using the unified expression language that we support besides field. So you can actually type in field expressions in the decision tables, but also expression language expressions like unified expression language. And you can find all that on the docs. So they are linked from the website, the DMN Camunda Cloud website, in the Getting Started guide. They will find the link to the documentation, and there you can see how that works. Right, I think we are through. I thank you very much for attending this webinar. I'm excited to see that obviously there's certain interest in DMN as well as Camunda, as well as DMN and Camunda in the cloud, and we will send out the recording next week. As well as the slides. And if you should be interested in all this, please don't hesitate to contact us, because we are very eager to learn about your requirements regarding DMN, regarding cloud offerings around Camunda, and happy to discuss that. Okay, that's about it for now. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.